My wife called me a disgrace in front of my friends and coworkers and abandoned me at the restaurant on my birthday. As she stormed off, she shouted, "I prefer to spend the night with my ex-lover than with you. You should be grateful I even looked your way." I grinned quietly and waited. This morning, my phone erupted with 223 missed calls. You know what they say about turning 38? Absolutely nothing. Because 38 is that awkward middle-aged limbo where you're too old to pretend you're still figuring life out, but too young to start complaining about your back every 5 minutes. So naturally, I figured my birthday dinner would be just another Tuesday night with better wine and forced small talk. Boy, was I wrong. The whole thing started innocently enough. Chez Laurent. You know, one of those pretentious French joints where they charge you $40 for 3 scallops and call it artisanal, was buzzing with the usual suspects. My work crew had shown up in their business casual armor, clutching their phones like security blankets and making that weird small talk people make when they're forced to socialize outside the office. "How's the project going, Adrian? And did you catch the game last night?" The kind of conversation that's about as deep as a puddle after a light drizzle. Lydia had insisted on inviting her little social circle too, because God forbid we have a gathering without her Greek chorus of perfectly manicured enablers. They sat there picking at their salmon tartare, probably calculating how much each bite cost and whether it was Instagram-worthy. You could practically hear them mentally composing their stories at the cutest little bistro with the gang. Hashtag blessed, hashtag foodie, hashtag living my best life. I should have seen it coming when Lydia kept checking her phone every 30 seconds, that little smirk playing at the corners of her mouth like she was holding onto the world's juiciest secret. But honestly, I was just trying to get through the evening without anyone asking me about my 5-year plan or whether we were thinking about kids soon. Because nothing says happy birthday like a bunch of people interrogating you about your life choices over overpriced appetizers. The restaurant itself was doing its best impression of Parisian sophistication. You know, exposed brick walls, Edison bulb lighting that makes everyone look either mysterious or like they have jaundice, and waiters who somehow manage to look down on you while literally serving you. Our table was right in the middle of the dining room, perfectly positioned for maximum visibility. In retrospect, Lydia probably requested it specifically. Prime real estate for her upcoming performance. My colleagues were being their usual selves. Mike from accounting was telling his story about almost meeting a celebrity at Starbucks for the 3rd time this month, while Janet from HR kept taking photos of her wine glass from different angles. "The lighting here is just so moody," she kept saying, as if she was documenting some kind of artistic breakthrough instead of a Tuesday night dinner. Then there was Lydia's crew. Marissa, who somehow made a career out of lifestyle consulting, which as far as I can tell means she gets paid to tell rich people what to buy. There was Catherine, whose husband owns half the commercial real estate downtown and who never lets anyone forget it. And of course, Vivian, who runs some boutique PR firm and speaks exclusively in buzzwords like synergy and brand optimization. Real salt-of-the-earth types, these ladies. The conversation flowed like molasses uphill. Work talk, weather talk, that weird political small talk where everyone dances around actually saying anything meaningful, because heaven forbid someone might have an opinion. I was nursing my second bourbon and wondering if I could reasonably fake food poisoning when Lydia suddenly stood up. Now, my wife has always had a flair for the dramatic. It's one of those things that seemed charming when we were 25 and dating, back when her little theatrical moments felt spontaneous and fun. These days, they feel more like carefully choreographed productions designed for maximum impact. But this was Broadway-level stuff. She raised her wine glass, a $20 per ounce Bordeaux that she'd specifically ordered because Adrian needs to develop a more sophisticated palate, and cleared her throat. The whole table went quiet, probably expecting some sweet, if slightly rehearsed, birthday toast. You know, the usual, here's to another year of adventures together nonsense. Instead, she looked directly at me with those cold blue eyes and said, "I'd like to make a toast to my husband, Adrian." Her voice had that particular edge to it, like a knife being sharpened. A man who has consistently proven himself to be a complete and utter disgrace. The silence that followed was deafening. You could literally hear the couple at the next table stop mid-conversation. Even the waiters seemed to pause in their choreographed dance around the dining room. It was like someone had hit the mute button on the entire universe. But Lydia wasn't done. Oh no, this was just the opening act. You know what, everyone, she continued, her voice getting stronger, more confident, like she was feeding off the shock radiating from our table. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I've realized something important. I would literally rather spend the night with my ex-lover than waste another single moment of my life pretending to enjoy the company of this pathetic excuse for a man. The words hit the table like a grenade. Mike's mouth actually fell open, and I'm pretty sure Janet dropped her phone. Marissa and her crew were trying to look scandalized, but you could see the gleeful anticipation in their eyes. This was the kind of drama they lived for, the sort of story they'd be dining out on for months. Lydia smiled then, not a happy smile, but the kind of smile a cat makes right before it tears apart a mouse. "So happy birthday, darling," she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Consider this my gift to you, the truth about what everyone really thinks of you." And then she did it. She actually gathered her purse, threw her napkin on the table, and walked out of the restaurant. Just like that. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor like a countdown timer, each step echoing through the suddenly silent dining room. Every head in the place turned to watch her grand exit, and then slowly swiveled back to me. The aftermath was beautiful in its own twisted way. My coworkers looked like they'd just witnessed a car accident, horrified but unable to look away. They kept glancing at each other, probably trying to figure out if they should say something, do something, or just pretend the whole thing never happened. Marissa and her friends were barely containing their glee, whispering behind their hands like a bunch of high school mean girls who'd just watched the unpopular kid get pantsed in front of the whole cafeteria. But here's the thing, and this is where it gets interesting, I didn't explode. I didn't chase after her, didn't throw my own drink, didn't even raise my voice. I just sat there, looked around the table at all those expectant faces, and smiled. Not a fake smile, not a bitter smile, but a genuine, almost peaceful smile. "Well," I said, picking up my bourbon and taking a slow sip, "that was certainly something." I flagged down the waiter, pulled out my own credit card, not our joint account, mind you, but my own personal card, and said, "Check, please." The beautiful thing about rock bottom is that it gives you a solid foundation to build on. And as I sat there, watching my colleagues squirm in their seats and Lydia's friends exchange their little looks of mock sympathy, I felt something crystallizing inside me. Not humiliation, not rage, but something sharper, cleaner, something that felt suspiciously like clarity. Because here's what Lydia didn't understand in all her theatrical fury. She'd just done me the biggest favor of my life. She'd shown everyone exactly who she really was. And more importantly, she'd freed me from having to pretend our marriage was anything other than the elaborate charade it had become. The check came, I paid it without flinching, and I walked out of that restaurant with my head held high. Behind me, I could hear the whispered conversation starting up again. The shocked, "I can't believe she just did that," and "Poor Adrian, how embarrassing." But for the first time in years, I wasn't the one who should be embarrassed. That night marked the end of one Adrian Wells and the birth of another. The old Adrian would have been crushed, would have spent weeks analyzing what he'd done wrong, how he could have been better, more worthy of love and respect. But the new Adrian? Well, he was already starting to plan. You want to know when a marriage starts dying? It's not during the screaming matches or the dramatic door-slamming episodes you see in movies. Nope, it dies during the quiet moments, in the spaces between words, in the mechanical precision of two people going through the motions of being married without actually remembering why they bothered in the first place. Take our morning routine, for instance. Every single day for the past 3 years, I've made Lydia's coffee exactly the same way. And I mean exactly. We're talking laboratory-level precision here, people. 18 grams of those ridiculously expensive Colombian beans she orders online because God forbid we use something you can actually buy at a normal grocery store. Water heated to precisely 205 degrees Fahrenheit because anything hotter burns the delicate flavor notes, and anything cooler is apparently an insult to coffee farmers everywhere. Then there's the pour. Oh, the pour. It has to go into one of her precious porcelain cups, the ones her mother gave us for our wedding that cost more than my first car. These aren't just cups, mind you. They're heirloom pieces that require their own special shelf and apparently have feelings that can be hurt if you put them in the dishwasher like a common peasant. I used to think this little ritual was sweet, you know? Back in our first apartment, That cramped little one-bedroom above the Thai restaurant where the smell of pad Thai was permanently embedded in the walls, making her coffee felt like an act of love. We'd dance around that tiny kitchen, bumping into each other and laughing about it. She'd wrap her arms around my waist while I waited for the water to heat up, and we'd talk about our plans for the day, our dreams for the future, what we wanted to do when we made it. Those were the days when we'd split a $12 bottle of wine and think we were living large. When she'd steal my t-shirts and wear them as pajamas. When we'd spend Saturday mornings in bed, not because we were too lazy to get up, but because we genuinely enjoyed each other's company. We had this playlist, God, this is embarrassing to think about now, called Kitchen Dance Party, that was just a random collection of songs that made us feel invincible. Everything from old Motown classics to terrible pop songs that we'd sing at the top of our lungs while making breakfast. But somewhere along the way, those sweet little moments calcified into rigid expectations. The coffee ritual stopped being about connection and started being about performance. Perfect technique, perfect temperature, perfect presentation. And Lydia stopped wrapping her arms around me while I made it. Instead, she'd sit at our granite kitchen island. Because of course we upgraded to granite. Can't have the neighbors thinking we're poor. Scrolling through her phone with the kind of focus most people reserve for performing surgery. These days, our morning conversations consist of me saying, "Good morning, beautiful," because I'm nothing if not consistent, and her responding with a grunt that could charitably be interpreted as acknowledgement of my existence. She'll sip her perfectly crafted coffee while double-tapping through Instagram stories, probably judging other people's breakfast presentations or getting inspiration for her next charity event photo shoot. The worst part? She still expects the coffee. Every morning. Same time, same specifications, same ritual. But now it feels less like a loving gesture and more like I'm a well-trained barista who happens to sleep in her bed. And heaven help me if I ever get the temperature wrong or use the wrong cup. The look of disappointment she gives me could freeze lava. It's funny how the workplace became my sanctuary. At Morrison & Associates, I'm Adrian Wells, Senior Project Manager and Certified Problem Solver. People actually listen when I talk. They value my opinions, they trust my judgment, and when I walk into a room, conversations don't suddenly stop. Novel concept, right? My colleagues see me as competent, reliable, maybe even a little clever when I crack a joke during those endless Monday morning meetings. Sarah from marketing always laughs at my PowerPoint puns. Yeah, I make PowerPoint puns, sue me, and Tom from operations actually seeks out my advice on handling difficult clients. There's this whole version of me that exists from 9 to 5 that Lydia has never bothered to meet. At work, I'm the guy who can untangle a project timeline that looks like someone threw spaghetti at a wall. I'm the one they call when a client is threatening to walk and someone needs to smooth things over. Hell, I even got a commendation last year for exceptional leadership under pressure when the Henderson account almost imploded and I managed to salvage not just the project, but our relationship with their entire company. But the moment I walk through our front door, that perfectly painted front door on our perfectly manicured suburban street, with our perfectly maintained lawn that I spend every Saturday pretending to enjoy mowing, I transform back into Lydia's supporting actor. The guy who makes the coffee and pays the bills and occasionally gets trotted out for social functions when she needs a +1. The house itself feels like a museum sometimes. Everything perfectly placed, everything carefully curated for maximum visual impact. The throw pillows that nobody's allowed to actually throw. The coffee table books that nobody reads but look intellectual and sophisticated. The art on the walls that Lydia selected not because she loved it, but because her interior designer assured her it was investment quality and would photograph well for entertaining. We have dinner parties where I'm introduced as my husband Adrian, in the same tone she might use to say my accountant or my dentist. Necessary, useful, but not particularly interesting. Her friends smile politely and ask what I do, then glaze over when I explain project management, because apparently coordinating multi-million-dollar construction timelines isn't nearly as fascinating as whatever MLM scheme they're currently peddling to their social media followers. The really twisted part is that I started believing it. Started thinking maybe I really was boring. Maybe I really wasn't worth listening to. Maybe this was just what marriage looked like after the honeymoon phase wore off. I'd catch glimpses of myself in the bathroom mirror, still the same guy who used to make Lydia laugh until she cried, Still the same guy who once talked her through a panic attack at 3 in the morning. Still the same guy who drove 6 hours to help her move out of her college apartment. And wonder where the hell that person went. But here's the thing about slow-motion disasters. You don't realize you're in one until you're already buried under the rubble. Every small compromise, every little accommodation, every moment of biting your tongue instead of speaking up, they add up like compound interest until one day you wake up and realize you're living someone else's life. The birthday dinner wasn't really the beginning of the end. It was just the moment when the curtain finally dropped and everyone could see what had been happening behind the scenes all along. Lydia hadn't suddenly become cruel and dismissive. She'd been practicing for years. And I hadn't suddenly become invisible. I'd been disappearing one morning coffee at a time, one polite smile at a time, one swallowed opinion at a time. The old Adrian, the one who danced in kitchen and believed in happily ever after, he'd been dying by degrees. And honestly, by the time Lydia stood up at that restaurant, I was almost grateful she'd finally put him out of his misery. You know how they say hindsight is 20/20? Well, that's a load of crap. Hindsight is more like trying to read an eye chart while someone's throwing mud at your face. You can make out the big letters, but all the details that actually matter are just blurry smudges until it's too late to do anything about them. The charity dinner happened 3 months before my birthday massacre, and at the time, I thought it was just another one of those painful social obligations that came with being married to someone who treated networking like an Olympic sport. The annual gala for something important. Honestly, I can never keep track of which cause we're supposed to be passionate about this month. Last year it was literacy, before that it was childhood hunger, and this season it was apparently arts education, because nothing says, I care about underprivileged kids, like spending $3,000 on a table at the country club. The venue was exactly what you'd expect. One of those places that screams, we have money and we're not afraid to show it, with crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than most people's cars and enough gold leaf to make King Tut jealous. The kind of place where they charge you $50 for a chicken breast and call it farm to table because the farm happened to be in the same state. I'd worn my good Navy suit. You know, the one that actually fits properly and doesn't make me look like I borrowed my dad's clothes for prom. Lydia had insisted I get a proper haircut for the occasion, which meant spending way too much money at some trendy salon where they offered me sparkling water and asked about my hair goals like I was training for the Follicle Olympics. But apparently, even my best efforts weren't enough for the sophisticated palates of Lydia's social circle. Marissa Crane, and yes, she always introduces herself with both names like she's running for office, had positioned herself at our table like some kind of social warfare general. You know the type. Perfectly blown-out blonde hair that never moves, designer dress that costs more than my monthly mortgage payment, and that particular brand of smile that looks warm from across the room, but turns arctic the moment you get close enough to see her eyes. The woman has made a career out of being married to money and acting like it makes her some kind of philanthropic genius. Her husband owns a chain of car dealerships across 3 states, which apparently qualifies her to have opinions about education policy and urban development. She's one of those people who starts every sentence with "in my experience," and then follows it up with something she clearly read on Pinterest 5 minutes earlier. Now, I should mention that I wasn't exactly killing it in the charm department that night. Don't get me wrong, I can hold my own in most social situations, but these charity galas are like speaking a foreign language where everyone else got the phrase book and I'm just guessing at what sounds right. The conversations all follow the same script. Someone mentions their recent vacation to somewhere with too many vowels in the name. Everyone nods appreciatively. Then someone else one-ups them with a story about their kid getting into an Ivy League school or their latest kitchen renovation. I was trying to contribute to a discussion about sustainable architecture. You know, something I actually know about since I've managed more green building projects than most of these people have hot dinners. When Marissa decided to make her move, she was holding one of those ridiculously expensive champagne flutes, the kind that's so delicate you're afraid to breathe on it wrong. I was gesturing with my hands, probably talking too enthusiastically about LEED certification standards, when she suddenly lurched forward. The champagne went everywhere, all over my jacket, my shirt, even managed to splash onto my shoes. "Oh my goodness," she exclaimed, her voice dripping with the kind of fake concern that wouldn't fool a kindergartner. "I'm so clumsy. Adrian, I'm absolutely mortified." Now, accidents happen. I get that. Spill champagne on someone at a crowded event? Could happen to anyone. But here's the thing. I watched it happen. I saw the slight adjustment of her wrist, the way she angled the glass, the little pause before the accidental collision. This wasn't clumsiness. This was a calculated hit. The entire table turned to look, because nothing draws attention like a well-dressed man suddenly looking like he got attacked by a very expensive sprinkler system. Lydia jumped up with napkins, making all the right concerned wife noises, but I caught that flash of annoyance in her eyes. Not annoyance at Marissa for the accident, mind you. Annoyance at me for somehow causing this social disruption by existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Don't worry about it, I said, trying to dab champagne out of my jacket while maintaining what was left of my dignity. These things happen, but Marissa wasn't done with her performance. Let me pay for the dry cleaning, she insisted, loud enough for half the room to hear. I feel terrible about this. Although, and here came the kicker, delivered with that perfect combination of concern and condescension that rich women have perfected into an art form. Maybe this is a sign you should invest in some stain-resistant fabrics. You know, something more practical for these kinds of events. The implication was clear as crystal. I was the kind of person who needed to dress for spills because I obviously didn't belong in places where people knew how to handle champagne properly. I was the discount store husband at a luxury brand party. I excused myself to the bathroom, partly to attempt some damage control on my shirt, but mostly to avoid doing something that would give Lydia another reason to be embarrassed by me. The bathroom, naturally, was fancier than most people's living rooms. Marble everything, little cloth towels that you use once and throw in a basket like some kind of textile aristocrat. I was standing there, dabbing at champagne stains with a towel that probably cost more than my lunch, when I heard voices from the hallway. Female voices, talking in those stage whispers that are designed to be overheard. I don't know how Lydia tolerates him. That was Marissa's voice, crystal clear and sharp as a blade. He's such an embarrassment. Did you see how he was going on and on about building codes, or whatever? At a charity gala. Read the room, you know. There was a murmur of agreement, and then another voice. Catherine, I think, one of Lydia's tennis buddies. He tries so hard, but he just doesn't fit in. It's almost painful to watch. And then the voice that made my blood freeze. I know, right? Sometimes I wonder what I was thinking. Lydia, my wife, the woman who'd promised to love and honor me, laughing along with her friend's character assassination. Maybe it's time for an upgrade, Marissa suggested with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. Life's too short to settle, you know? More laughter, more agreement, more of my wife participating in a conversation about how inadequate I was while I stood 15 feet away, covered in champagne, and trying to salvage my dignity along with my shirt. I stayed in that bathroom for another 10 minutes, not because I thought I could actually fix the stains, but because I needed time to process what I'd just heard. This wasn't just social awkwardness or a bad night. This was systematic, calculated. Marissa's accident wasn't random. It was designed to make me look foolish, to give them ammunition for exactly the kind of conversation I'd just overheard. When I finally came back to the table, they were all smiles and sympathy again. Marissa asked how the stains were coming out. Catherine complimented my good attitude about the whole thing. Lydia squeezed my arm and whispered that we could leave early if I was uncomfortable. But something had fundamentally changed in those few minutes. The scales had fallen from my eyes, and for the first time, I saw the situation clearly. I wasn't a beloved husband being supported through a minor social mishap. I was a target, and my own wife was not just allowing the attack. She was actively participating in it. That night, lying in bed next to Lydia while she scrolled through her phone, probably texting her friends about what a disaster the evening had been, I started keeping mental notes. Not consciously at first, but that little voice in the back of my head began cataloging things. The way she introduced me to people, the subjects she steered conversations away from when I was talking, the little sighs and eye rolls she thought I didn't notice. The birthday dinner wasn't the beginning of Lydia's campaign to humiliate me. It was just the grand finale. And that champagne-soaked night at the charity gala, that was when I finally realized I was at war, even if I was the only one who didn't know it yet. They say curiosity killed the cat, but nobody ever mentions what happens to the husband who finds a hotel receipt in his wife's coat pocket. Spoiler alert, it's not pretty, but it's definitely educational. It was a Tuesday night in February, One of those miserable winter evenings where the cold seeps through your bones and makes everything feel gray and depressing. Lydia had rolled in around 11:30, which wasn't unusual anymore. Her charity work had been keeping her out later and later, and honestly, I'd stopped asking questions because the answers always made me feel like an idiot for caring. How was the planning session? I'd asked from the couch, where I was pretending to watch some documentary about penguins, but really just killing time until she got home. Because apparently, I'm the kind of pathetic husband who can't fall asleep until his wife is safely tucked in bed next to him, even when that wife treats him like an annoying roommate who occasionally pays rent. Exhausting, she'd sighed, hanging up her coat in the hallway closet with the kind of dramatic flourish that suggested she'd been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Marissa had so many opinions about the venue, and Catherine kept changing her mind about the menu. I swear, it's like herding cats sometimes. Standard response. Standard complaints. Standard performance of the martyred woman who sacrifices so much for the greater good. I nodded sympathetically and made appropriate noises while she disappeared upstairs to wash off the day. Another one of her little phrases that always sounded vaguely sexual, but probably wasn't meant to be. Here's the thing about living with someone for 15 years. You develop a sixth sense about their routines. Lydia always hung her coat in the same spot, always placed her purse on the little table by the door, always kicked off her heels and left them in a perfectly straight line. Creature of habit, my wife. Predictable as clockwork. Which is why the crumpled piece of paper that fluttered to the floor when she hung up her coat caught my attention. Not because it was unusual for things to fall out of pockets. Hell, I'm constantly finding random receipts and business cards in my own clothes. But because Lydia never left things in her pockets. Ever. The woman was anal retentive about keeping her belongings organized. Finding a loose receipt in her coat was like finding a unicorn in your backyard. Theoretically possible, but highly suspicious. I waited until I heard the shower running upstairs before I picked it up. And let me tell you, those 30 seconds of moral wrestling were intense. Part of me, the trusting husband part, the part that still believed in privacy and respect, and all those marriage counselor buzzwords, said to just throw it away. None of my business what she spent money on. Maybe it was tampons, or birthday gifts, or some other perfectly innocent explanation. But the other part of me, the part that had been keeping mental notes since the champagne incident, whispered that maybe I should take a look. Just a quick glance. What could it hurt? Famous last words, right there. The receipt was from the Astoria Hotel downtown. Not exactly a dive, but not the kind of place Lydia usually frequented for her charity meetings either. The charity board always met at the country club or occasionally at someone's house, never at hotels. But hey, maybe they'd decided to try something different. Maybe the country club was booked. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. Then I saw the itemized charges. Room 412. One night. Champagne service for 2. Late checkout at 2 p.m. The timestamp showed she'd checked in at 7:30 p.m. the previous evening. The same evening she'd texted me at 8 o'clock claiming she was still stuck in meetings and would be probably another few hours. The same evening I'd heated up leftover pasta and watched Netflix alone, like a good little husband waiting for his busy wife to come home from her very important charitable obligations. My hands started shaking. Actually shaking, like I was some kind of leaf in a windstorm. Because there's a difference between suspecting your wife might be lying to you and holding physical proof that she definitely, absolutely, 100% is lying to you. It's the difference between wondering if you're paranoid and knowing for certain that you're not paranoid enough. Champagne for 2. That detail kept bouncing around in my skull like a pinball. Unless Lydia had suddenly developed multiple personality disorder, she wasn't drinking champagne alone in a hotel room. And unless the charity board had drastically changed their meeting format to include overnight accommodations and alcohol service, this wasn't about planning any fundraising gala. I stood there in our hallway, our perfectly decorated, carefully curated hallway with the family photos and the expensive wallpaper Lydia had insisted we needed, holding a piece of paper that basically amounted to a confession. My wife, the woman who made me coffee specifications every morning, the woman who complained about my social awkwardness at parties, the woman who'd been systematically undermining my confidence for months, was apparently spending her evenings in hotel rooms with someone who wasn't me. The shower was still running upstairs, so I did what any rational, mature adult would do in this situation. I took pictures of the receipt with my phone. Multiple angles, close-ups of the details, shots that clearly showed the date and timestamps. Because if 15 years of marriage had taught me anything, it was that Lydia had an exceptional talent for making me doubt my own perceptions. She could gaslight a lighthouse if she put her mind to it. Then I carefully placed the receipt back on the floor where it had fallen, because I'm nothing if not thorough in my deception. When she came downstairs 20 minutes later, hair perfectly blown out, and wearing that silk pajama set that cost more than most people's monthly car payments, I was back on the couch pretending to care about penguin mating rituals. "Did you pick up something from the floor?" she asked, scanning the hallway with the kind of casual attention that wasn't casual at all. "Nope," I said, not looking away from the TV. "Should I have?" She shrugged and disappeared into the kitchen, probably to make herself some herbal tea and scroll through Instagram before bed. Standard Tuesday night routine. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing back toward the hallway. She knew something had fallen out of her pocket. She just wasn't sure if I'd seen it. The next morning, after she left for her yoga class, and yes, those are definitely air quotes now, I checked her car. Not because I enjoyed playing detective in my own marriage, but because once you find one lie, you start wondering what other lies might be hiding in plain sight. The mileage told a story that had nothing to do with charity meetings or yoga classes. According to the odometer, she'd driven 37 miles the day of the hotel receipt. I mapped it out on my phone. Our house to the country club where the charity board supposedly met was 8 miles round trip. Our house to the yoga studio was 12 miles round trip. Our house to the Astoria Hotel was 18 miles round trip. 37 miles total. Exactly what you'd drive if you went from our house to the hotel, spent the night, and then drove home the next morning. Not exactly the kind of mathematical coincidence that happens by accident. I sat in my car in our driveway, looking at our house, the house we'd bought together, the house where we'd planned to grow old together, the house that now felt like a carefully constructed lie, and tried to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do with this information. Confront her? Sure, because that had worked so well in the past. Every time I'd questioned her about anything, she'd managed to turn it around until I was apologizing for being suspicious. "Adrian, I can't believe you don't trust me. Adrian, this is exactly the kind of paranoid behavior that makes people uncomfortable around you. Adrian, maybe if you were more supportive of my charitable work, you'd understand how demanding it can be." No, confrontation was off the table. At least for now. Instead, I did something that probably makes me a terrible person, but felt absolutely necessary at the time. I started documenting everything. Every late night, every suspicious explanation, every time her story didn't quite add up. Because if there's one thing I learned in project management, it's that patterns don't lie, even when people do. The hotel receipt wasn't the smoking gun. It was just the first piece of evidence in what was turning out to be a much larger puzzle. And call me crazy, but I was starting to think I might actually be good at solving puzzles. You know what they say about hitting rock bottom? That it's a great place to build from. But what they don't mention is that sometimes you need a friend with a shovel to help you start digging out. Enter Rachel Porter from accounting, a woman who could spot financial shenanigans from 3 counties away and had the kind of no-nonsense attitude that cut through bullshit like a hot knife through butter. I'd known Rachel for about 2 years, ever since she transferred from our Chicago office to help modernize our accounting systems. She was one of those people who seemed to have her life figured out in a way that made the rest of us look like we were stumbling around in the dark. Mid-40s, divorced, 2 kids in college, and the kind of sharp intelligence that made you grateful she was on your side in budget meetings. We developed what you might call a workplace friendship, the kind where you grab coffee together when the vending machine coffee becomes undrinkable, commiserate about management's latest brilliant ideas, and occasionally vent about life's general unfairness. She had this way of listening that made you feel like your problems weren't completely ridiculous, which was more than I could say for most people in my life at that point. The morning after my hotel receipt discovery, I must have looked like someone had run me over with a truck, backed up, and done it again for good measure. I was sitting in the break room, staring at my coffee like it might contain the answers to all of life's mysteries, when Rachel walked in with that particular look that said she'd already cataloged my emotional state and was preparing to do something about it. "Rough night?" she asked, settling into the chair across from me with her own mug. One of those practical ceramic ones that had survived multiple office relocations and probably knew more company secrets than the CEO. You could say that, I replied, trying to summon up my usual work-appropriate smile and failing miserably. Just one of those weeks, you know? Rachel had this way of tilting her head when she was analyzing something, like she was processing data that the rest of us couldn't see. Adrian, in the 2 years I've known you, you've never been just having one of those weeks. You're the guy who finds silver linings in quarterly tax assessments. So what's really going on? That's when I realized I had a choice to make. I could keep pretending everything was fine, maintain the facade of the happily married project manager who had his shit together, and continue slowly losing my mind in private. Or I could trust someone, really trust someone, with the truth about what my life had become. Looking back, it was probably one of the smartest decisions I've ever made. Can I ask you something? I said, lowering my voice even though the break room was empty. If you suspected someone was lying to you about where they were spending money, how would you go about proving it? Rachel's eyebrows went up, but she didn't immediately start asking questions or offering platitudes. She just sat there for a moment, processing. We talking about expense reports? Or something more personal? More personal. Oh. She leaned back in her chair, and I could practically see the wheels turning. Well, hypothetically speaking, financial records don't lie. People do. Circumstances can be misinterpreted, but bank statements and credit card bills? They're like a diary written in numbers. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos of the hotel receipt. Just like that. No preamble, no explanation. Sometimes you reach a point where you're either going to trust someone completely or not at all. Rachel studied the images with the same intensity she brought to analyzing quarterly reports. The Astoria, she said finally. Nice place. Not exactly charity meeting material. That's what I thought. And the champagne for two is a particularly interesting detail. She handed my phone back. Adrian, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Do you think your wife is having an affair? The word hung in the air between us like a live grenade. Nobody had said it out loud before. Not me, not anyone. Hearing it spoken in Rachel's matter-of-fact tone made it real in a way that all my suspicious thoughts and mental note-taking hadn't. I think, I said carefully, that I don't know what to think anymore. But I know she's lying to me about where she's going and what she's doing, and I'm tired of feeling crazy for noticing. Rachel nodded slowly. Okay, here's what I'm going to tell you, and I'm saying this as someone who's been through a divorce and learned some hard lessons about financial infidelity. If she's careless with lies, she's probably careless with money too. In my experience, people who are sneaking around emotionally are usually sneaking around financially as well. That hit me like a slap. What do you mean? I mean you should check your accounts. All of them. Joint checking, savings, credit cards, anything with both your names on it. Look for patterns, regular withdrawals, purchases that don't make sense, money going places you don't recognize. She paused, studying my face. When was the last time you actually looked at your bank statements? The honest answer was embarrassing. Lydia had always handled our finances, claimed she was better with numbers and organization. I just worked and deposited my paychecks and trusted that she was managing everything responsibly. Classic mistake, right there. It's been a while, I admitted. Adrian. Rachel's voice took on that patient but firm tone she used when explaining budget variances to people who clearly hadn't done their homework. You're a project manager. You track timelines and resources and budgets for a living. How have you been managing your own household finances? I haven't. She handles all that. Rachel actually winced. Oh, honey, that's like letting someone else drive your car while you're blindfolded in the passenger seat. It might work out fine, but if it doesn't, you're going to be the one who pays for the crash. She pulled out her laptop. Rachel was one of those people who carried her work computer everywhere, like a security blanket made of spreadsheets and databases. Look, I know this is personal, and I know it's scary, but knowledge is power. And right now, you're operating from a position of weakness because you don't have complete information. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we do what I do best, follow the money trail. You give me access to your financial records, and I'll help you figure out exactly where your money has been going. Think of it as a forensic audit of your marriage. The offer was generous and terrifying in equal measure. Having someone else look at your finances feels incredibly intimate, like letting them read your diary or go through your medicine cabinet. But Rachel had this way of making practical solutions feel less overwhelming. Why would you do that? I asked. I mean, This isn't exactly your problem. Rachel smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. Because about 5 years ago, I discovered that my ex-husband had been funding his girlfriend's shopping habits with our joint credit card for 8 months. I spent 2 years in financial recovery because I trusted someone to handle money responsibly and didn't pay attention to the warning signs. She closed her laptop. Nobody should have to learn that lesson the hard way. And you think Lydia might be doing something similar? I think Lydia is spending money on hotel rooms and champagne for two. And unless she's developed a split personality, she's not drinking alone. Where there's emotional infidelity, financial infidelity usually follows. It's like gravity, natural law. That afternoon, I went home during lunch and gathered every financial document I could find. Bank statements, credit card bills, investment account summaries. Everything Lydia had been managing while I focused on being the dependable breadwinner. It was like archaeological dig through our marriage, layer by layer of financial decisions I'd never been part of. Rachel met me after work at a coffee shop downtown, laptop bag in hand, and that determined expression she wore when tackling particularly complex accounting problems. Okay, she said, settling into our corner booth. Let's see what we're dealing with. For the next 2 hours, we went through everything. And I mean everything. Rachel had this systematic approach where she color-coded different types of expenses and created spreadsheets that turned our chaotic financial history into clear, understandable patterns. What we found was worse than I'd imagined, but also strangely liberating. Because for the first time in months, I had actual facts instead of just suspicions and gut feelings. Adrian, Rachel said finally, looking up from her laptop screen with an expression somewhere between sympathy and professional outrage. We need to talk. If there's one thing I've learned about truly vindictive people, it's that they don't just want to destroy you. They want to make sure you look like you deserved it. Enter Elaine Morrison, my mother-in-law, a woman who could find fault with Mother Teresa's charitable work and probably critique Gandhi's hunger strikes for lacking proper presentation. The call came on a Wednesday morning, right as I was reviewing project timelines and pretending my marriage wasn't imploding in slow motion. Elaine's voice had that particular tone she reserved for announcing family obligations that weren't really requests so much as royal decrees disguised as suggestions. Adrian, darling, she began, and right there I knew I was screwed. Elaine only called me darling when she was about to ask me to do something I definitely didn't want to do. I've arranged for a wonderful stylist to come help you prepare for your birthday celebration. Vivian comes highly recommended. She's worked with some very important people. Now, let me paint you a picture of my mother-in-law. Elaine is one of those women who turned being married to money into a full-time career. Her husband made his fortune in real estate development back in the 80s, and she spent the last 40 years perfecting the art of looking down on people from great heights. She's got that particular brand of passive-aggressive sweetness that Southern women have weaponized into an art form, even though she's never lived south of Connecticut. That's very thoughtful, I said, because I'd learned that disagreeing with Elaine was like arguing with a hurricane, pointless and likely to cause significant property damage. But I think I can handle picking out an outfit for dinner. Oh, sweetie, she laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that made you feel like you'd just suggested solving world hunger with finger painting. This isn't just any dinner. We're talking about important people here. Clients, colleagues, Lydia's friends, people who matter in this community. You want to make sure you look appropriate. The word appropriate hung in the air like a threat, because in Elaine's vocabulary, appropriate meant acceptable to my social circle, which was roughly equivalent to passing a test I didn't know I was taking with criteria nobody had bothered to explain. I appreciate the thought, but Vivian will be there Friday at 2, she interrupted smoothly. Don't worry about the cost, darling. Consider it our gift to you. We just want you to look your best for such a special occasion. And just like that, the decision was made for me. Because that's how the Morrison family operated. They made plans for your life, and then presented them as generous offers you couldn't possibly refuse without looking ungrateful. Friday rolled around like an execution date. Vivian arrived at exactly 2 o'clock, because of course she did. She was one of those aggressively fashionable women who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine spread about power dressing for the modern executive. Everything about her screamed expensive, from her perfectly highlighted hair to her designer handbag that probably cost more than my car. She walked into our house like she owned the place, immediately cataloging everything with the kind of professional assessment that made you feel like you were failing some kind of test. Her eyes swept over our furniture, our artwork, our general existence with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent years judging other people's life choices. "So you're Adrian," she said, circling me like a shark evaluating potential prey. "Elaine told me we have our work cut out for us." Did she now? I tried to keep my voice neutral, but something about this woman set my teeth on edge. Maybe it was the way she was looking at me like I was a particularly challenging home renovation project. "Don't take it personally, honey," Vivian said, pulling measuring tape out of her bag. "Some people just need more help than others when it comes to presenting themselves properly. It's all about knowing your audience." For the next hour, she proceeded to dismantle my entire wardrobe with the surgical precision of a critic reviewing a particularly terrible Broadway show. My suits were off-the-rack obvious, my shoes were discount store tragic, and my ties apparently screamed middle management desperation. "The problem," she explained while holding up one of my favorite shirts like it was evidence in a criminal trial, "is that you're dressing for the job you have instead of the life you're trying to live. Lydia moves in sophisticated circles. You need to look like you belong there." She'd brought an entire rack of clothes with her, suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage, shirts with thread counts that sounded like SAT scores, and accessories that probably had their own insurance policies. Everything was perfectly coordinated, meticulously chosen, and completely soulless. "This is what confidence looks like," she said, holding up a charcoal gray suit that looked like it had been designed by robots for other robots to wear to robot business meetings. Classic, elegant, expensive enough to command respect, but not so flashy that you look like you're trying too hard. The trying-on process was humiliating in ways I hadn't expected. Vivian had opinions about everything: my posture, my haircut, even the way I walked. She made me practice confident stances and coached me on appropriate conversation topics for the kind of people who would be at my birthday dinner. "Remember," she said, adjusting my tie for the 5th time, "you're not just representing yourself. You're representing Lydia and her family. People will be judging her based on how you present yourself. No pressure there, right?" But here's the thing that really got to me. Lydia loved every minute of it. She kept popping in to check on our progress, cooing over Vivian's choices, and making little suggestions about how to really bring out Adrian's best features. It was like watching two interior designers discuss how to arrange furniture, except I was the furniture. "Oh, Vivian, you're a miracle worker," Lydia gushed when she saw me in the final outfit. "He actually looks like he could fit in with civilized people." Civilized people. As if I'd been some kind of barbarian all these years, grunting my way through social situations and embarrassing her with my complete lack of refinement. The really twisted part was how they kept framing it as a gift, as something they were doing for my benefit. "We just want you to feel confident," Vivian kept saying. "We want you to walk into that restaurant knowing you look like you belong there." But I could see what was really happening. This wasn't about making me look good. It was about making me look like their version of acceptable. They were dressing me up like a Ken doll, creating a version of Adrian Wells that met their specifications rather than letting me be myself. I went along with it, partly because fighting seemed pointless and partly because I was curious to see where this was all heading. Because by this point, I'd started to recognize the patterns. The charity dinner humiliation, the hotel receipts, Rachel's financial discoveries, and now this elaborate makeover session. They all felt connected somehow, like pieces of a larger puzzle I was only beginning to understand. The final insult came when Vivian presented me with a bill for consultation services. Apparently, even though Elaine was paying for the clothes, I was expected to cover the cost of being told everything wrong with my appearance. $400 to be insulted professionally. That night, after Vivian had packed up her rack of expensive armor and left me with detailed instructions about proper grooming protocols, I stood in our bedroom looking at myself in the mirror. The man staring back at me looked polished, professional, and completely unfamiliar. Like someone had taken my face and photoshopped it onto a stock photo model. Lydia came up behind me, wrapping her arms around my waist in a gesture that might have been affectionate if I hadn't known better. "You look so handsome," she murmured. "I can't wait for everyone to see how good you clean up." How could I clean up? Like I was some kind of stray dog she'd found on the street and rehabilitated for public consumption. "Should be quite the party," I said, and I meant it. because I was finally starting to understand that my birthday dinner wasn't going to be a celebration at all. It was going to be a performance, with me as the unwitting star of a show I hadn't auditioned for. The only question left was whether I was going to be the hero or the victim of this particular production. You ever have one of those moments where you can feel destiny approaching like a freight train, and you're standing on the tracks with just enough time to see it coming, but not enough time to get out of the way? That's exactly how I felt walking into Chez Laurent that night, wearing Vivian's carefully curated costume and knowing damn well I was about to star in a show I definitely hadn't auditioned for. I'd made a decision that morning, standing in front of my closet with two options staring back at me. The robot suit Vivian had selected that made me look like a mannequin in an expensive department store, or my own navy suit, the one I'd bought myself, that actually fit my personality instead of someone else's idea of what I should be. Guess which one I chose? The navy suit was my small act of rebellion, my way of saying that if Lydia was going to destroy me in public, she was going to have to destroy the real me, not some polished version she'd had professionally manufactured for the occasion. It was a good suit, well-tailored, appropriate, confident without being flashy. The kind of suit that said, I know who I am and I'm comfortable with it. Of course, the moment Lydia saw me, her face went through a series of micro-expressions that would have been fascinating if they weren't so predictable. Surprise, annoyance, that particular brand of controlled fury she'd perfected over the years. I thought you were going to wear the charcoal gray, she said, her voice carrying just enough edge to let me know I'd already screwed up her carefully laid plans. I decided to go with something more me. I replied, adjusting my tie with what I hoped looked like casual confidence. You always say I should be more authentic. Her smile could have frozen lava. Of course, darling. You look very you. The restaurant was packed with our carefully curated guest list, 17 people who represented a cross-section of my professional life and Lydia's social ambitions. From my corner, there was Mike from accounting, still telling his almost meta-celebrity stories, Janet from HR, who'd already started photographing her appetizer from multiple angles, and Tom from operations, who kept checking his phone like he was expecting news about a national emergency. Lydia's contingent had turned out in force too. Marissa Crane held court at one end of the table, regaling everyone with stories about her latest charitable endeavors, while somehow making it clear that her contributions were more meaningful than everyone else's. Catherine was there with her husband Richard, both of them radiating that particular brand of old money confidence that comes from never having to worry about anything more pressing than which vacation home to visit for the holidays. The conversations followed their predictable patterns: work gossip, vacation plans, that weird social dance where everyone tries to one-up each other without being obvious about it. I found myself genuinely enjoying parts of it, especially when Tom started talking about a project we'd collaborated on that had saved the company about $500,000. For a few minutes, I almost forgot I was supposed to be the evening's sacrificial lamb. Adrian really pulled that one out of the fire, Tom was saying, and I could see a few people actually paying attention, actually recognizing that I might be more than just Lydia's plus one. We were looking at potential delays that could have cost us the entire contract, but his timeline restructuring saved the whole project. It was nice, feeling competent and valued, even if it was just for a few minutes. Marissa looked like she'd bitten into something sour, probably because the conversation had drifted away from topics she could dominate, but everyone else seemed genuinely interested in hearing about actual professional accomplishments instead of charity committee drama. That's when I noticed Lydia checking her phone again, that same little smirk from earlier playing at the corners of her mouth. She had that look people get when they're about to deliver a punchline they've been setting up all evening. The look of someone who knows something everyone else doesn't. This is all so fascinating, she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the conversation like a blade. Adrian's little work stories are always so detailed. The way she said little work stories made it sound like I'd been boring everyone with tales of my stamp collection. Conversations started to falter as people picked up on the shift in her tone. You know how a room can change in an instant? How the air can suddenly feel heavier, like a storm's about to break. That's what happened at our table. Lydia stood up, wine glass in hand, and I knew with crystal clarity that this was it. This was the moment everything had been building toward. All those months of subtle undermining, all those carefully planted seeds of doubt, All that preparation with stylists and guest lists and perfect venue selection. It was all leading to this single moment. "I'd like to propose a toast," she announced, her voice carrying just far enough to catch the attention of nearby tables. Because of course she wanted an audience for this. Public humiliation only works if it's actually public. The table went quiet, everyone raising their glasses in anticipation of what they probably expected to be a sweet, if slightly tipsy, birthday tribute. I could see Mike smiling that goofy smile people get when they think they're about to witness a Hallmark moment. Janet had already started positioning her phone to capture what she probably thought would be an Instagram-worthy toast. "To my husband, Adrian," Lydia began, looking directly at me with those cold blue eyes that I'd once thought were beautiful. "A man who has consistently proven himself to be a complete and utter disgrace." The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop in the parking lot. Every face at the table froze in that particular expression people get when they can't quite process what they've just heard. Like someone had just announced that gravity was taking the night off. But Lydia wasn't finished. Oh no, this was just the opening act of her grand performance. "You know what, everyone," she continued, her voice getting stronger, more confident, like she was feeding off the shock radiating from our audience. "I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I've realized something important about my marriage." She paused for dramatic effect, scanning the faces around the table like an actress playing to the balcony. Marissa and her crew were trying to look appropriately scandalized, but I could see the gleeful anticipation in their eyes. This was better than cable television. I would literally rather spend the night with my ex-lover than waste another single moment of my life pretending to enjoy the company of this pathetic excuse for a man. The words hit the table like a physical force. Mike's mouth actually fell open, and Janet dropped her phone with a clatter that seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Richard made a choking sound like he'd inhaled his wine, while Catherine just stared with the kind of fascination people usually reserve for traffic accidents. The beautiful thing about moments like this is how they crystallize everything. All the doubts, all the confusion, all the months of wondering if I was going crazy or if my marriage really was as toxic as it felt. All of that just evaporated in the face of this perfect, undeniable clarity. "So happy birthday, darling," Lydia concluded, her voice dripping with mock sweetness that could have corroded steel. "Consider this my gift to you. The truth about what everyone really thinks of you." And then she did it. She actually gathered her purse, threw her napkin on the table like she was dropping a gauntlet, and walked out of the restaurant. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor like a countdown timer, each step echoing through the suddenly silent dining room. I sat there for a moment, looking around at the faces staring back at me, some horrified, some sympathetic, some barely containing their excitement at having witnessed such spectacular drama. The whole restaurant had gone quiet, conversations stopping at neighboring tables as people tried to figure out what they'd just witnessed. Then I did something that probably surprised everyone, including myself. I smiled. Not a bitter smile, not a broken smile, but a genuine, almost peaceful smile. Because in that moment, I realized that Lydia had just done me the biggest favor of my life. "Well," I said, raising my own glass in a mock toast, "that was certainly illuminating." I flagged down our waiter, pulled out my personal credit card, not our joint account, because I was done paying for her performances, and said, "Check, please." The most beautiful part of hitting rock bottom is that it gives you a solid foundation to build on. And as I paid that bill and walked out of Chez Laurent with my dignity intact, I knew that Adrian Wells 2.0 was about to make his debut. You know what's funny about having your life blown up in public? The sudden clarity that comes with it. Walking back into our house that night, walking back into my house after Lydia's little Broadway performance, felt like seeing the place with completely new eyes. Every perfectly arranged throw pillow, every carefully curated piece of art, every single detail of our supposedly perfect life suddenly looked like what it really was. Set dressing for a show I'd never wanted to be in. Lydia was gone, obviously, probably off celebrating her triumphant performance with whoever she'd been meeting at the Astoria Hotel, which meant I had the place to myself for what might be the first time in months. Time to do what I should have done weeks ago, back when I was still playing the role of the trusting husband instead of accepting my new position as the betrayed one. I started in her home office, the room she'd claimed as her personal sanctuary for managing the household finances and her various charitable commitments. Funny how I'd always respected that boundary, never questioning why she needed privacy to balance a checkbook or coordinate bake sales. Now, sitting at her desk and looking through drawers I'd never opened, I realized that trust and stupidity often look remarkably similar from the outside. The first thing I found was a separate phone charger. Not the one for her iPhone, a different one entirely. Which was interesting, because as far as I knew, Lydia only had one phone. Unless, of course, she had a second phone for conversations she didn't want showing up on our family plan. The kind of conversations that might involve late-night hotel stays and champagne for two. But the real treasure trove was in her laptop. Lydia had always been meticulous about organization, and apparently that extended to her secret life as well. She had folders within folders, spreadsheets tracking expenses I'd never seen, and email threads that painted a picture of a woman I'd never met. Rachel had been right about the money. Jesus Christ, had she been right about the money? $15,000 a month. That's how much had been disappearing from our joint accounts over the past 8 months. Siphoned off through a network of transfers and purchases so carefully orchestrated that I probably never would have noticed if I hadn't been looking for it. Boutique purchases at stores I'd never heard of. Weekend getaways to places we'd never visited together. Wire transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. I called Rachel. Adrian. Her voice was thick with sleep, but she didn't sound annoyed to be hearing from me at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. How did the birthday dinner go? It went exactly like we thought it would, I said, scrolling through another folder of financial documents. Rachel, I need your help. Can you come over? I'm looking at Lydia's computer, and I think we're going to need your expertise to understand all of this. 20 minutes later, she was sitting in my kitchen with her laptop bag and a thermos of coffee that suggested she'd been expecting this call. Rachel Porter, forensic accountant, an unwitting lifeline, ready to help me decode the financial archaeology of my marriage. Show me everything, she said, settling into the chair next to me at Lydia's desk. For the next 3 hours, we went through it all. Bank statements going back 2 years. Credit card bills with purchases I'd never seen. Investment accounts I didn't know existed. It was like excavating a parallel life that had been running alongside my own without my knowledge. Look at this, Rachel said, pointing to a series of transfers from our joint savings account. Same amount, same day of the month, going back 8 months. $1,500 each time, transferred to an account registered under the name Morrison Holdings, LLC. Morrison Holdings. Lydia's maiden name. What the hell is Morrison Holdings? Rachel's fingers flew across her keyboard, pulling up business registration databases and cross-referencing account numbers. It's a limited liability company registered in Delaware 6 months ago. Single owner, listed as Lydia Morrison Wells. She looked up at me with an expression somewhere between professional admiration and personal disgust. Your wife created a shell company to hide money from you. But it got worse. Much worse. The Morrison Holdings account wasn't just collecting money from our joint accounts. It was funding a lifestyle I'd never been part of. Hotel stays at places that charged more per night than most people made in a week. Shopping sprees at boutiques where a handbag cost more than our monthly mortgage. And then there were the wire transfers, regular payments to something called Blackstone Consulting. Blackstone Consulting, Rachel read from her screen. Business consulting firm, registered in New York. Principal owner. She paused, her eyebrows shooting up. Principal owner is Marcus Blackstone. Marcus Blackstone. Lydia's ex-boyfriend from college, the one she'd always described as the one who got away during those early conversations when we were still sharing our romantic histories. The same Marcus who'd shown up at our wedding reception uninvited and somehow charmed his way into staying for dinner. The Marcus who'd sent Lydia flowers just because a few times over the years, always with notes that were just friendly enough to avoid suspicion, but personal enough to make me uncomfortable. She's been funding her ex-boyfriend's business, I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. With our money, our savings, our retirement fund, the money we were supposed to be saving for the future she kept talking about. Rachel was quiet for a moment, studying the numbers with the kind of professional detachment that somehow made the betrayal feel more real. Adrian, in my professional opinion, what we're looking at here is systematic financial abuse. She's been stealing from you for months. using sophisticated methods to hide the theft, and funneling the money to a third party who may or may not be aware of the source. We printed everything: bank statements, wire transfer records, business registration documents, email threads between Lydia and Marcus discussing investment opportunities and shared ventures. By 3 in the morning, we had enough evidence to fill a briefcase and probably put Lydia away for embezzlement if I wanted to press charges. But I wasn't done yet. Because while we'd been following the money trail, I'd remembered something else Lydia had always been meticulous about: documentation. She kept records of everything, including things she probably should have deleted. Her email accounts, all 3 of them, including the one I wasn't supposed to know about, contained a greatest hits collection of her real thoughts about our marriage, her plans for my public humiliation, and her ongoing relationship with Marcus. Email threads going back months, detailing not just their financial arrangements, but their personal ones as well. The most damning was an email thread from 2 weeks before my birthday, where Lydia and Marissa discussed the Adrian problem like I was a pest they needed to exterminate. "The dinner will be perfect," Lydia had written. "I've invited all the right people, made sure he'll be properly dressed, and planned exactly what I'm going to say. By the time I'm finished, his reputation will be so damaged that the divorce will look like a mercy killing. Nobody will blame me for leaving him." Marissa's response was even better. "Brilliant, darling. Make sure you get it on video if you can. This kind of thing always plays better when people can see his reaction." Video. They'd actually planned to record my humiliation for posterity. By the time the sun came up, Rachel and I had assembled what she called the most comprehensive documentation of marital financial fraud she'd ever seen. We had bank records, email evidence, business registrations, and a timeline that showed exactly how Lydia had been systematically draining our accounts to fund her new life with Marcus. "What's next?" Rachel asked, packing up her laptop as the morning light started filtering through the kitchen windows. "Next," I said, looking at the pile of evidence we'd assembled, "I make some phone calls. Because if Lydia wants to play games, she's about to find out that I'm much better at this than she thought." The first call was to Henry, the maitre d' at Chez Laurent. He'd been working there for 15 years and had seen enough domestic drama to write a book. More importantly, he'd been horrified by what he'd witnessed the night before and was more than willing to provide a written statement about exactly what Lydia had said and how she'd said it. The second call was to my lawyer, Margaret Steele, who Rachel had recommended as someone who specialized in high-conflict divorces and had a particular talent for dealing with spouses who thought they were smarter than everyone else. "Mr. Wells," Margaret said when I explained the situation, "I think you and I need to have a very long conversation. And you're going to want to bring all of that documentation with you." The third call was the most satisfying. To our joint credit card company, freezing all accounts and requiring dual authorization for any future charges. Lydia's shopping spree days were officially over. By 9 a.m., I was sitting in Margaret Steele's office with a briefcase full of evidence and a plan that would have made Rachel proud. Because if there's one thing I'd learned in project management, it's that success is all about preparation, timing, and having the right team on your side. Lydia thought she'd destroyed me at that restaurant. What she'd actually done was declare war on someone who'd finally learned how to fight back. You know what they say about revenge being a dish best served cold? Well, that's bullshit. Revenge is actually best served meticulously planned, legally airtight, and with enough evidence to choke a federal prosecutor. Which is exactly what Margaret Steele and I spent the next week putting together. A comprehensive package that would make Lydia's little birthday performance look like amateur hour. Margaret was exactly the kind of lawyer you'd want in your corner during a nuclear divorce. Mid-50s, steel gray hair that she wore like armor, and the kind of sharp intelligence that could slice through legal loopholes like a hot knife through butter. Her office walls were lined with framed victories, settlements that had left cheating spouses financially devastated and legally humiliated. "Mr. Wells," she said, reviewing our evidence for the third time. "In 30 years of family law, I've rarely seen such a comprehensive case of marital fraud. Your wife didn't just cheat on you. She built an entire criminal enterprise around it. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. We'd file the divorce papers with a comprehensive financial disclosure that laid out every penny Lydia had stolen. We'd simultaneously report the Morrison Holdings account to the IRS for tax evasion, because apparently Lydia had forgotten that shell companies still have to pay taxes. And we'd send copies of everything to the board of directors of every charity she'd ever been involved with, because embezzling from your husband while serving on nonprofit boards tends to raise uncomfortable questions about fiscal responsibility. But the real masterstroke came from an unexpected source. Margaret's investigator had tracked down someone from Marcus Blackstone's past who had her own axe to grind. Her name is Rebecca Martinez, Margaret explained, sliding a folder across her desk. She was Marcus's business partner 3 years ago, until he screwed her out of $60,000 and destroyed her credit rating in the process. When she found out he was funding his current ventures with money stolen from some other woman's husband, well, let's just say she was very motivated to help. Rebecca had recordings, hours of them, phone conversations where Marcus bragged about his sugar mama, who was financing his lifestyle. Dinner conversations where Lydia mocked me openly, calling me pathetic and so desperate for approval that he'd probably thank me for cheating on him. Audio evidence of them planning my public humiliation, discussing exactly what she'd say at the restaurant and how they'd celebrate afterward. The recordings were devastating, but the real nuclear weapon was what Rebecca had captured just 2 days after my birthday dinner. Lydia and Marcus at some upscale wine bar, toasting her perfect performance and planning how they'd split the assets once the divorce was finalized. "He's so broken now," Lydia's voice came through the speakers with crystalline clarity. "Did you see his face when I said I'd rather be with you? I thought he might actually cry right there at the table. It was beautiful." Marcus's laugh was even worse. "The poor bastard probably still thinks this is about him not being good enough. He has no idea we've been planning this for months. The best part is that by the time this is over, his reputation will be so destroyed that no one will question why I'm leaving him. I'll get the house, half his retirement, and alimony, and everyone will think I'm the victim who finally escaped from her embarrassing husband." Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. They'd basically confessed to conspiracy, fraud, and emotional abuse, all while sipping $20 glasses of wine and congratulating themselves on their criminal genius. Margaret and I spent 3 days crafting our response, a legal bomb disguised as routine paperwork. Divorce petitions citing adultery, financial abuse, and fraud. Injunctions freezing all joint accounts and assets. Criminal referrals to the district attorney's office for embezzlement and tax evasion. Civil suits against both Lydia and Marcus for conspiracy and racketeering. We filed everything on a Friday morning, because Margaret believed in giving people the weekend to fully absorb the magnitude of their situation before the real chaos began on Monday. The first domino fell at 11:47 a.m. when the sheriff's deputy served Lydia with papers at her yoga studio. According to the deputy's report, she actually screamed, "This can't be legal," loud enough for half the class to hear, then locked herself in the bathroom for 20 minutes. Apparently, downward dog and emotional meltdowns don't mix well. The second domino was the frozen accounts. Lydia tried to buy lunch with our joint credit card and watched the transaction get declined in front of a restaurant full of her society friends. Then she tried the backup card. Also declined. By the time she got to her personal account, the one I wasn't supposed to know about, that had been frozen too, pending investigation of the Morrison Holdings transfers. But the real fireworks started when the story hit the charity circuit. Margaret had timed the disclosure letters perfectly, sending them to arrive just as the weekly board meetings were getting underway. The Riverside Arts Foundation, the Children's Literacy Alliance, the Metropolitan Women's Club, every organization Lydia had used to build her social standing received a comprehensive package detailing her financial crimes and moral bankruptcy. The phone started ringing at 2:30 p.m. First one call, then 3, then a steady stream that I let go to voicemail because I wanted to savor each increasingly panicked message. "Adrian, what the hell is this? Call me back immediately." That was from 2:47 p.m., still trying to sound authoritative. "Adrian, please, I think there's been some kind of mistake. We need to talk about this." 3:15 p.m., panic starting to creep in. "Adrian, I don't know what Rebecca told you, but she's lying. Marcus and I are just friends. This is all a misunderstanding." 4:22 p.m., full denial mode. By 5 p.m., the tone had shifted completely. "Adrian, please pick up. I know you're angry, but we can work this out. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. Please call me back." 223 missed calls. That's what my phone showed by the end of the day. 223 increasingly desperate attempts to reach me, each one more frantic than the last. The voicemails were even better. I listened to Lydia's voice crack as she realized that her carefully constructed social world was collapsing around her. Marissa had apparently called her screaming about being dragged into this mess and threatening to sue if her name appeared in any more legal documents. Catherine had already canceled their lunch plans indefinitely. Even her mother had called to demand an explanation for the scandalous accusations that were apparently spreading through their country club like wildfire. But the crown jewel came at 7:30 p.m., a voicemail from Marcus himself. "Adrian, this is Marcus Blackstone. I think we should talk. There's been a serious misunderstanding about my relationship with Lydia, and I believe we can resolve this without involving lawyers or, criminal prosecutors. Call me back as soon as possible." The beautiful thing about having really good legal counsel is that Margaret had prepared me for exactly this moment. "Don't respond to any of them," she'd advised. "Let them panic. Let them make mistakes. Desperate people do stupid things, and stupid things become evidence." By Monday morning, the local paper had picked up the story. Local charity board member accused of embezzling from husband to fund affair wasn't exactly the headline Lydia had been hoping for when she'd worked so hard to build her public profile. The ripple effects were beautiful to watch. The Arts Foundation put out a statement distancing themselves from Lydia and announcing a comprehensive review of financial oversight procedures. The Women's Club quietly removed her from their membership directory. Even the yoga studio started advertising their welcoming environment free from drama and negativity. Margaret called me that afternoon with an update that made my entire week. Marcus Blackstone just fired his lawyer and hired a criminal defense attorney. Apparently, the IRS has some questions about his business finances, and the state attorney general is looking into racketeering charges. Your wife's boy toy is about to discover that stealing money has consequences. The final blow came Tuesday evening, when Lydia showed up at my office building. Security called me from the lobby to let me know there was a visibly distressed woman demanding to see me, and would I like them to escort her out, or should they call the police? I had them send her up, partly because I was curious to see how she'd try to spin this disaster, and partly because I wanted to look her in the eye when I told her exactly how fucked she really was. She looked like hell. Designer clothes wrinkled, makeup smudged, hair that hadn't seen a salon in days. This was not the polished, confident woman who'd stood up at Chez Laurent to destroy my life. This was someone who'd just realized that actions have consequences and payback can be a real bitch. "Adrian," she said, her voice shaking, "we need to talk." I leaned back in my chair and smiled, the same quiet smile I'd given her at the restaurant. "Lydia," I said, "I think we're way past talking. But please, have a seat. I'm curious to hear what you think you can possibly say that would make any difference at this point." The look in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. For the first time in our marriage, Lydia Morrison Wells was completely, utterly, and irrevocably screwed. You know what real victory tastes like? It tastes like a perfectly prepared bourbon neat, sipped slowly in the same restaurant where someone tried to destroy you, while their desperate text messages light up your phone like a Christmas tree and you don't even bother to read them. The courtroom proceedings were almost anticlimactic after everything that had led up to them. Margaret had assembled such an airtight case that Lydia's lawyer, the third one she'd hired after the first two dropped her when they realized what they were dealing with, basically spent the entire hearing trying to negotiate damage control rather than actually defending her actions. The judge, Honorable Patricia Morrison, no relation, thankfully, had clearly seen enough of these cases to cut through the bullshit with surgical precision. When Lydia tried to claim that the Morrison Holdings account was for household expenses, Judge Morrison actually laughed out loud. Not a polite chuckle, but a full-throated laugh that echoed through the courtroom like a gavel strike. "Mrs. Wells," she said, adjusting her glasses to peer at the financial documents spread across her bench, "champagne and hotel rooms for two hardly qualify as household expenses unless you've been entertaining guests in a very unconventional manner. The moral clause in our prenuptial agreement, something Lydia's mother had insisted on to protect the family assets, turned out to be the gift that kept on giving. Adultery and financial misconduct voided any claim she might have had to spousal support or property division. What she'd meant as protection for her family's money ended up protecting mine instead. By the time the dust settled, I kept the house, all retirement accounts, and even the vacation condo in Vermont that Lydia had picked out but I'd paid for. She walked away with her personal belongings, her legal bills, and a criminal record that would follow her for the rest of her life. Marcus, meanwhile, had bigger problems than a broken heart. The IRS doesn't particularly care about romantic drama, but they're very interested in unreported income and tax evasion. Last I heard, he was facing federal charges and owed more in back taxes and penalties than his entire consulting business was worth. Turns out that when you build your financial empire on stolen money, the foundation tends to crumble pretty quickly. The social fallout was even more satisfying than the legal victory. Lydia's carefully cultivated network of influential friends evaporated faster than morning dew. Marissa Crane, who'd been so eager to participate in my public humiliation, suddenly discovered that being associated with a convicted embezzler wasn't great for her own social standing. She actually had the audacity to call me once, trying to claim she'd been manipulated by Lydia and was just as much a victim as I was. I hung up on her mid-sentence. Some conversations aren't worth having. The charity boards didn't just distance themselves from Lydia, they actively erased her contributions from their promotional materials. The plaque with her name at the Children's Literacy Center was quietly removed and replaced with one honoring anonymous donors. The Metropolitan Women's Club not only revoked her membership, but also instituted new background check requirements for board positions. Even her yoga studio put up a sign about maintaining a positive, drama-free environment. But the real measure of how completely the tables had turned came 6 months later, when I was having dinner at Morrison & Associates' annual client appreciation event. The same crowd that had witnessed my birthday humiliation was there, but this time the dynamic was completely different. Adrian, Mike from accounting, came rushing over with genuine enthusiasm. Did you hear? The Henderson Project just won that industry award for innovative project management. They specifically mentioned your timeline restructuring in the write-up. Janet from HR was there too, but instead of taking pictures of her food, she was actually engaging in real conversation. I have to say, Adrian, watching you handle everything with such class and dignity, it was really inspiring. A lot of people would have fallen apart, but you just got stronger. Even some of Lydia's former friends made awkward attempts at reconciliation. Catherine showed up with her husband, both of them trying to act like they'd never participated in the systematic undermining of my confidence. Adrian, we always knew you were a good man, Catherine said with the kind of fake sincerity that couldn't fool a golden retriever. We're so sorry about everything that happened. I was polite but distant. Some bridges are meant to stay burned. The evening reached its perfect crescendo when Henry, the maitre d' from Chez Laurent, came over to personally escort me to what he called your usual table. Apparently, I'd become enough of a regular that they'd started holding my favorite spot. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who'd been there that infamous Tuesday night. Mr. Wells, Henry said with genuine warmth, it's always a pleasure to serve someone who conducts themselves with such dignity. As I settled into my seat, the same chair where I'd sat while my wife publicly eviscerated me, my phone buzzed with yet another text from Lydia. I didn't even look at it. Whatever desperate plea or angry accusation she was sending could wait forever as far as I was concerned. Instead, I ordered my bourbon neat, pulled out my phone, and did something I'd been looking forward to for months. I blocked her number. Just like that. No dramatic confrontation, no final words, no closing speech about justice and redemption. Just a simple swipe that erased her ability to reach me. The waiter brought my drink, and I raised it in a silent toast to the empty chair across from me. The chair where Lydia had sat while planning my destruction, never realizing she was actually orchestrating her own downfall. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's just getting better. And sitting there in that restaurant, surrounded by people who actually respected me, sipping bourbon that I could afford because I wasn't funding someone else's betrayal, I realized I'd never been better in my life. My phone buzzed again, probably another desperate message from someone who used to matter. I smiled, turned it face down on the table, and took another sip of my drink. Some stories don't end with dramatic confrontations or tearful reconciliations. Sometimes they just end with a quiet recognition that you've finally become the person you were always meant to be. And honestly, that felt pretty damn good.